Welcome back to Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. In the first half of today's show, we talk with Bob Woodson to find out how people are working their way out of poverty. In our second half hour, Jim Lacey, former Chief Counsel for Technology at the U.S. Department of Commerce and General Counsel to the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission, is going to tell us how the state of California is working its way into poverty. Jim, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you, Bill.
Jim, I just finished your book, Taxofornia, oddly enough, on the way back from a flight to California. And it appeared to me to be an unbroken parade of horribles, economic disasters that the state has brought or is bringing on itself. Why should the rest of us care?
Well, I didn't write Taxofornia because I wanted people to move out of California. I wrote Taxofornia because I want to see the state reformed. But there's a lot of reasons why other states should care, including Massachusetts, because California has led the nation in so many ways, and in one specific way, I'll take you back to 1978 and 1980 when property taxes in both California and Massachusetts were going absolutely through the roof because of the inflation that was rampant at the period of time and because of increasing property values. Senior citizens in California and in Massachusetts were almost literally being taxed out of their homes.
Right, they were being driven out.
So 1978, Howard Jarvis, who I wrote for, crusty old man, with an idea that property taxes were too high, helped lead the national tax revolt by passing Proposition 13. It's something that I worked on. California led the nation in passing Proposition 13 in 1978. And, of course, we did it against the conventional wisdom. We had exactly the same governor then in California that we have today, Jerry Brown. Liberal Democrats were in supermajority or majority control of the legislature. Today they're in supermajority control. And we got that passed. And according to Arthur Laffer, that tax break, coupled with the Reagan expansion, led to a huge expansion in California. It led to increasing tax revenue in every category of taxation because of the fact that we were putting money back in people's pockets, except property taxes, and property taxes were back up to where they were pre-Proposition 13 level in 4 to 5 years. Now, why is that important for your question? Because it is exactly what happened in Massachusetts. And Proposition 13 was, in fact, the precursor to Proposition 2.5. Proposition 2.5 in Massachusetts got control of just terribly increasing property taxes by putting a limit of 2.5% of the valuation of the property that could be taxed and limited tax increases by the localities to no more than 2.5%. Now, that happened in a state that was controlled by liberal Democrats, but people were able to rise up. So in that case, California did lead the nation, and Massachusetts followed.
But that was 35 years ago, and all of those benefits have been squandered away in the intervening 35 years.
Well, I don't think all the benefits have. I think that Proposition 13 and Proposition 2.5 have helped to stop that element of taxation from getting out of control. But you're right. The reality is that all Proposition 13 did and Proposition 2.5 did, as Stephen Moore has written, is slow down the growth of that particular tax. California still has, after Proposition 13, the 15th highest property tax in the nation, and I'm sure that Massachusetts is up there. But look, here's the problem. California is now totally and completely out of control. Today, California has the highest state income tax in the nation. It has the highest state sales tax in the nation. It has the highest gas tax at the pump in the nation. It has the highest corporate tax west of the Mississippi.
Don't the people of California say that this is a wonderful thing because they get all these services from the government?
No. The issue is not getting the services. The issue is that the liberal Democrats are taxing and they're taxing and they're taxing. And the effect of it is to create poverty in the state. Today, California has a new distinction, which other states have to look out for, given California's high tax posture. California has the highest taxes in every posture that a state can tax. And what has it resulted in? According to Obama's Census Bureau, for the last 2 years in a row, California now has the highest poverty rate in the nation. There's over 6.1 million people in California living in poverty. It's almost 24%. This is unheard of in a state that has all of the wealth that has all of the good things going for it that California has. So why do we have the high tax rates? The reason we do is because public employee unions have completely swamped the political system. In California, all 8 state constitutional officers are liberal Democrats. Liberal Democrats have 2/3 control of the state Senate, 2/3 control of the state assembly. Liberal Democrats have benefited from $1.5 billion of political spending by the California Teachers Association, the SEIU in California, since the year 2000.
That was a phenomenal number reading your book, especially considering that liberal Democrats are the first ones who complain about the impact of money on politics. And then to look at the numbers, and I think you said $500 million in spending by public service unions, it's quite an astounding figure.
Well, the fact is that the elected officials in California are beholden to public employee unions. The Republicans really have hardly a chance anymore because they've so swamped the system with political spending. To give you an example of how stark the contrast is, the California Chamber of Commerce in the same time period has spent $50 million on politics. Now, that's a lot of money to spend on politics, but the public employee unions have spent 10 times that. Why are they doing it? They're doing it to protect overly generous public employee pay and particularly to maintain defined benefit pension plans that really are terribly underfunded in the state, and they're causing havoc throughout municipalities. You know, in California, our state is becoming characterized by municipal bankruptcies.
Mm-hmm.
Before Detroit went bankrupt, the largest municipal bankruptcy in the country was Stockton, which is a city in California, an important city in the Central Valley. We've had San Bernardino go bankrupt. USA Today says that there's as many as 10 cities waiting in the ring to go into bankruptcy. And the reason is because they are having to increase their obligations for public employee pensions to such an extent that they can't afford to meet their other obligations. I'll give you an example, something other states should be concerned about. The city of San Jose is the 3rd largest city in California. It's also the 10th largest city in the nation. It recently announced a city budget for the next year of $1 billion. 30% of that budget, $300 million, goes exclusively to pay for public employee pensions. The pension obligation is so high in California cities like San Jose that San Jose can't afford to maintain a burglary unit in its police department anymore.
Let me go back to my initial question. Why should the rest of us care if Californians become slaves to their public employees? It serves them right.
Well, because it's happening throughout the rest of the country. The Detroit bankruptcy is based on the same premises that have bankrupted Stockton and San Bernardino, and that will likely bankrupt other cities in California like Oakland.
Well, sooner the better.
No, well, here's the problem. The problem is that we're turning this problem over to our children, to our youth. If you look at a municipality that can't afford to pay for police services and fire services and can't afford to fill potholes, what you end up having is a government whose major purpose is to pay for pensions for public employees. If you want to talk about income inequality, Bill, and the looming income inequality for the next generations, just look to public employee pension pay and how out of whack it is. In San Francisco last year, a line firefighter, not a manager, was paid $348,000 for the year. That included overtime.
But the voters seem fine with that. If the voters are fine with that, let them have it.
Yeah, the reason I wrote Taxifornia is because the information needs to get out to the public. And I wouldn't necessarily say the voters are fine with it. I think that there is a huge industry on the part of the public employee unions to perpetuate election of liberal Democrats in office so that they can keep these totally out of whack high salaries that don't bear any relationship to private sector pay and these defined benefit plans. You know, California, that 348,000 firefighter can retire at age 55 at 90% of salary. The math just does not work out. While Jerry Brown might claim that there's a surplus in the state, the public employee union unfunded pension liabilities are probably above $500 billion. That's what a study from Stanford University said 2 or 3 years ago. It's just growing and growing. It's probably 700 or 800 billion. If the Securities and Exchange Commission regulated California and they had to uncook their books and provide...
Oh, that's true of every democracy. That's also true of the federal government. You know, they'd be
but
bankrupt.
If California had to do it, it would be in bankruptcy court. So a problem that we have is that there's too pervasive left-wing control, and California is unhealthy as a result of it. If we have a rash of bankruptcies, as we probably will have down the line, eventually they're not going to be able to provide hardly any public services other than to pay for pensions.
So, Jim, pause for a minute.
When that happens, Wall Street's going to stop investing in the bonds, and the whole situation is going to just explode.
Wouldn't that be the best thing for the rest of us? There are 49 other states. Anybody who doesn't like what's going on in California can vote with their feet, and apparently that's happening in increasing numbers. The sooner they reach their day of reckoning, the sooner the rest of us will wake up. And what's wrong with sacrificing Californians to their own folly?
The process is one that's not going to be just limited to California. We can see that in Detroit, and we can see that in other municipalities across the nation. Chicago certainly is having very significant financial problems, and it seeps over into the educational area as well. You know, the public employee unions in California make certain that the teachers are paid at the very highest level that they can be paid, but the students produce at the bottom, 45th, 48th.
But how does this affect the rest of us? So Detroit imploded. They deserved it.
Bill, I think that you're a little bit callous and maybe need to bring a little bit more focus. It's obvious that Boston and Chicago and New York have similar problems.
Yeah, we're next.
In New York, all you have to do is look to the controversy that's occurring with respect to charter schools to see that the public employee unions and Bill de Blasio, the mayor there, who's a left-wing socialist, they do not want to have competition in education. That's exactly the same position that the CTA takes in California. What they want to do is they want to push out alternate forms of education like charter schools and homeschooling and so on and so forth, because they don't result in more dues-paying union members that they can take money from to perpetuate a political system that elects left-wing liberals who are not enacting policies that favor the people in general. The policies that they're enacting favor their clients, and their clients are these public employees. You know, where I live in Orange County, the average firefighter pays $248,000 a year. What do you think it is in Boston? What do you think that the pension system is in Boston? It's becoming untenable.
It isn't sustainable. Of course it isn't. And if you look at the geographic rebalancing that's taking place, you're seeing net out-migration from the blue states into the red states. You're seeing business growth and economic growth in the red states and not the blue states. And this is how federalism rebalances. If you look at California right now, which is very similar to New York, the narrowness of the tax base should be terrifying people. 1% of the taxpayers pay 50% of the total state income tax in California. That's fewer 150,000 households are pretty much supporting the government. What happens if they leave?
The reality is you have a company like Apple in Cupertino, and they have this big operation and this big connection in Silicon Valley. But where do they choose to build their new domestic manufacturing plant that they made a big deal out of? And it's Austin, Texas.
Yeah.
So really, you know, we see from CEO magazine that California is rated as the worst place to do business for 9 years in a row. I think Forbes or one of the others says that it's the third worst place in the nation to do business. This state has to change. And I think that the fact that poverty is growing and remains essentially unrecognized by the liberal Democrats, Jerry Brown has failed to mention in his State of the State address, even once in his current incarnation as governor, that California's poverty rate is the highest in the nation. As poverty gets more rampant, as things get worse, as our unemployment rate stays 20 or 25% ahead of the other states, it basically just stands for an example of what not to do.
Well, it's a real tale of two cities. We were in San Francisco this weekend, walking down Market Street on a Sunday morning. I don't think I've ever seen so many vagrants in one place. It smelled like a urinal. The trash was abysmal. they've become like sacred cows in New Delhi. I mean, the populace there seems to protect and attract even more vagrants. They call them homeless people, even more vagrants to the street. It seems to be baked into the culture there. People seem to like having vagrants, and yet they throw rocks at Google buses. How do you explain that?
San Francisco is not representative of the state at all. Where I live in Orange County, California, about 41% of the registered voters are Republicans. Statewide, the GOP has had a precipitous decline. Statewide Republican registration is about 28.5%. What do you think the Republican registration is in the city of San Francisco?
I bet you it's under 5%.
You're close.
I'm close.
It's 8.5%.
Why is the GOP doing so abysmally, given the facts that, as you state them, given the alarm that should be sounding? Why are they doing so abysmally at the ballot box?
The state Republican Party is hampered by its ability to gain credibility and votes from the Latino community. It's basically a simple problem. In 1994, I believe, Pete Wilson, who was the governor, embraced a proposition called Proposition 187. Mm-hmm. And it was a proposition that was intended to reduce illegal immigration into the state by denying illegal immigrants certain taxpayer-funded benefits, such as emergency room treatment in hospitals. That proposition passed, and Wilson was narrowly reelected governor, beating Dianne Feinstein, who went on to be elected to the U.S. Senate. But it was thrown out by the courts, and the Democrats very skillfully in the last 20 years have used that support of what was perceived to be an anti-Latino insensitive initiative to hurt the Republican Party with its support from Latinos, even though the traditional values and the polling of the Latino community has demonstrated
lines up nicely, yeah. The family
again
values.
And again, it lines up very well with the California GOP. But the reality is that in 1984, when Ronald Reagan ran for re-election as president, he was able to achieve about a 44% of the Latino vote in California. But when Mitt Romney ran for president last time in California, he was only able to get about 22% of the vote. If Mitt Romney had gotten the vote that Ronald Reagan did among the Latino community in California in his run for president, he would have carried the state of California. That's how significant the problem is.
So is it possible for California to reinvent itself before the Republican Party reinvents itself? Isn't that the place to start?
Yeah, and I think that San Francisco is a place where some of that is happening. You know, there is an awful lot of innovation in Silicon Valley that's making its way into San Francisco. And even San Francisco itself has adopted some tax-friendly policies to try and improve the business climate. The unemployment is low in San Francisco, and part of the reason is that they've given tax incentives to companies like Twitter to come and put their new headquarters on Market Street there where you were walking. The idea is that if Twitter comes in and they have their headquarters there, that the vagrants are somehow going to leave. But the problem is that the Board of Supervisors aren't going to take the steps that they need to take to try and discourage aggressive panhandlers from being in that area. But the reality is whether they get involved in politics or not, whether they register as Republicans or not, Silicon Valley engineers, as they grow up in the San Francisco Bay Area and in San Francisco, are going to see the problems of urban life, and they're going to start to come up with solutions. There's one fellow who came up with a great idea right in San Francisco to fix the municipal transportation system. You know, the minibuses are threatening, they're crime-ridden, they smell bad, they're not on time, and what this fellow did is start an outfit called Leap Transport, which is a private bus system that basically takes clean buses, outfits them with Wi-Fi, they have comfortable leather seats, charges a couple bucks more than the muni, and it just mimics the municipal
So it's a market
system.
solution to a government failure.
Yes. So I believe that there are innovative solutions to California's public policy problems that are market-oriented, that may not necessarily come through government. And I think that these things need to be encouraged.
Jim, you've been fighting this fight since the 70s. You've watched your state spiral down. What keeps you going? Why don't you just move out yourself?
I'm a native Californian, and I love this state. We've got Yosemite. We've got the coastal beauty of the beaches of Oceanside. We've got the Russian River. We lead in entertainment. We lead in education. Our schools are absolutely fantastic. Stanford, Berkeley, USC, UCLA.
At the top, anyway.
This state has so much going for it. I didn't write Taxifornia to encourage people to leave the state. I wrote Taxifornia to encourage reform. The problem is that we've been knocking at that door for years and years, and it just isn't happening. And the state is slipping into economic chaos. It's not going to get better. It's going to get worse because of the failure to address these unfunded public employee pension systems. And I think people outside of California need to learn from this example while people like myself work from within to try and wake up the citizenry so that we can make the changes that are needed. I'm not super optimistic, but California is definitely worth salvaging.
Now, Jim, it's been frightening to read your book. It was equally frightening to chat with you. I wish you the best of luck, and I hope your neighbors pick up a copy and read it and turn around in time.
Thank you very much. It's been great to talk to you, Bill.
The dire warnings you've been listening to are from Jim Lacey, author of Taxifornia. I'm Bill Frezza, host of Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. That wraps up our show for this week. Come join me on Tuesday, May 21st at 6 p.m. at Lear's Irish Pub on Boston Street, where I'll be helping launch the Boston chapter of America's Future Foundation. See you next week.